How about any school activities while you're here?
I played field hockey for 2 years, I played lacrosse for 2 years, and I also managed voice wrestling.
In January 1999, an 18-year-old girl named Hae Min Lee vanished on her way to pick up her young cousin from school. Her body was discovered almost a month later, buried in Baltimore's Leakin Park. She had been strangled. Her ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Adnan Syed, was arrested, tried, and convicted of her murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 30 years. 15 years later, a podcast changed everything. But not because new evidence proved he was innocent, because someone told a very compelling story. Before we get into the media circus, let's look at what put Adnan Syed in prison in the first place, because it's important context that often gets lost in the noise. Hae Min Lee was Adnan's ex-girlfriend. By most accounts, the breakup had been messy. Adnan was raised in a conservative Pakistani Muslim household, and the relationship had been kept secret from his parents. When Hae moved on and started dating someone else, witnesses at school described Adnan as shaken. On the afternoon of January 13th, 1999, the same day Hae disappeared, multiple lines of evidence converge on Adnan. His friend Jay Wilds testified that Adnan told him he planned to kill Hae, then later that day showed Jay her body in the trunk of her car. Jay then helped Adnan bury the body in Leakin Park. Adnan's cell phone records placed his phone near the burial site that same evening. Another friend, Jen Pusateri, independently corroborated key parts of Jay's account, saying Jay came to her that day, told her what happened, and that they later disposed of shovels and clothing. Now here's the thing people forget. Jay took police directly to Hae's car, not just to the general area, to the specific street where it was parked. He could only have known that if he was there. There was no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, directly linking Adnan to the murder. That's a real weakness in the prosecution's case. But the absence of physical evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence. A jury of 12 people sat through 2 full trials, heard all of it, and convicted Adnan Syed twice. So, how does a man serving a life sentence end up walking free in 2022? Enter Rabia Chaudry. Rabia is a Pakistani-American attorney and longtime family friend of the Syed family. She had believed in Adnan's innocence from the beginning. And for years, she fought through legal channels, finding lawyers, filing appeals, working the system. And it kept failing. After yet another post-conviction hearing that wasn't going Adnan's way, Rabia made a decision that would change everything. In her own words, F the system. I want a journalist. She found Sarah Koenig, then a producer at This American Life, and pitched her the story. She wasn't expecting Serial. She said she hoped for an investigation, maybe a newspaper article. What she got was something far bigger. But here's the critical question we need to ask. Was this a journalist investigating a case? Or was it an advocate using a journalist as a tool? Serial launched in October 2014, and almost overnight it became a cultural phenomenon. Episodes were downloaded over 340 million times. People debated it at work, on Reddit, at dinner tables. It practically invented the modern true crime podcast format. And Sarah Koenig is a genuinely talented storyteller. The pacing, the intimacy, the week-by-week suspense, it was masterfully crafted. But, and this is a big but, masterful storytelling isn't the same as unbiased journalism. Critics of Serial have pointed out some consistent patterns in how Koenig frames the case. First, Adnan is presented sympathetically from minute one. Koenig famously asks listeners in the very first episode, looking at a photo of young Adnan, could someone who looks like that really strangle his girlfriend? Second, Jay's credibility is systematically dismantled, while Adnan's inconsistencies are minimized. Yes, Jay changed details of his story across multiple interviews. That's legitimately suspicious. But he never changed the core of it. Adnan showed him the body. Adnan asked for his help. And Jay knew where the car was. Serial spends far more time on Jay's contradictions than on Adnan's. Third, the evidence is presented out of order and in pieces. Each episode dangles a new theory, raises new doubt, leaves you uncertain, by design. That's good radio, but it's not a complete picture of a case. One analysis put it bluntly: Koenig becomes the defense and prosecution, and the listeners become the new jury. But unlike the real jury, they never hear the full case. And the real jury had already decided. The Undisclosed Machine. Serial ended without a verdict. Koenig concluded she didn't know if Adnan was guilty. Millions of listeners felt the same. And inside that vacuum of uncertainty, Rabia Chaudry stepped back in, this time with her own microphone. In 2015, she launched Undisclosed, a podcast co-hosted with attorneys Susan Simpson and Colin Miller, explicitly dedicated to re-examining the evidence in Adnan's case and others. It was, by its own description, a vehicle to raise funds for Adnan's legal defense. Let's be very clear about what Undisclosed was. It was advocacy content dressed up as legal analysis. The show found a passionate following. It presented dense, detailed examinations of evidence, cell tower data, lividity analysis, timeline reconstructions. On the surface, it sounded rigorous. In practice, many critics accused it of exactly the opposite. Here's a pattern that listeners and legal observers identified repeatedly. The Undisclosed hosts would introduce a contested theory, debate it among themselves, tentatively accept it, and then use that same unproven theory as the foundation for the next argument. Essentially, they were citing themselves. The lividity evidence is a perfect example. The hosts argued, loudly and repeatedly, that the pattern of blood settling in Hayes' body proved she wasn't buried where and when Jay said she was. This became a cornerstone of the innocence argument. But forensic experts pushed back, saying the analysis was based on misinterpretations and oversimplifications of the science. Yet in Undisclosed, it had already become established fact. The cell tower evidence is another. Serial had already raised doubts about a disclaimer on the phone records, indicating incoming call pings might be unreliable for location. Undisclosed ran with this hard. And fair enough, it's a legitimate point. But it wasn't the only evidence. It never is. One listener who went back through the court documents put it plainly. Undisclosed cherry-picked potential single dramatic facts to distract, but if you look at all the evidence as a whole, the jury got it right. The innocent bystander, Hae Min Lee. Here I want to stop and ask you something. In all the debate about Jay's inconsistencies, cell tower pings, and lividity science, who are we talking about? A jury trial, appeals, counter podcasts, Reddit threads, legal memos, HBO documentaries, true crime meetups. And Hae Min Lee? She was 18 years old. She had a diary. She had a little cousin she was supposed to pick up from school. She wanted to go to college. She had a new boyfriend she was excited about. Her family has never gone on a podcast. They never hired a media strategist. Hae's brother Young Lee posted anonymously on Reddit in 2014, and his words deserve to be heard. To me, it's real life. To you listeners, it's another murder mystery, crime drama, another episode of CSI. You weren't there to see your mom crying every night. The family released a statement during Syed's 2022 hearing. It remains hard to see so many run to defend someone who committed a horrible crime, who destroyed our family, when so few are willing to speak up for Hae. In the era of prestige true crime content, the victim's family rarely gets a media deal. The Playbook, Serial, Staircase, Making a Murderer. Now let's zoom out, because Adnan Syed's case didn't happen in isolation. It's part of a broader pattern, one that tells us something uncomfortable about the relationship between media, justice, and storytelling. Making a Murderer came out on Netflix in December 2015, just 1 year after Serial. It told the story of Stephen Avery, a Wisconsin man charged with murdering photographer Teresa Halbach. The documentary was a masterpiece of cinematic advocacy, and it generated over 500,000 petition signatures calling for Avery's release. People genuinely believed they'd witnessed a wrongful conviction. What the documentary didn't dwell on, the significant physical evidence against Avery, including his DNA under the hood latch of Halbach's car and the blood evidence inside the vehicle. The filmmakers focused on police misconduct, a real concern but not the whole picture. The Staircase, originally a French documentary, later bought by Netflix, followed novelist Michael Peterson, convicted in 2003, of murdering his wife Kathleen. The documentary followed his defense team over years, generating enormous sympathy for Peterson. He eventually walked free after an Alford plea, an arrangement where you plead guilty while maintaining innocence because sufficient evidence exists to convict you. In his own words, Peterson credits the staircase with helping him get out. All three cases share a common DNA. A convicted person, or their advocate, gains access to a trusted media platform. The narrative is shaped to favor the defense. Selective evidence, sympathetic framing, dismantled prosecution witnesses. A massive audience becomes emotionally invested in the wrongful conviction story. Legal pressure mounts, not necessarily because new evidence emerged, but because public opinion shifted. This is the true crime industrial complex at work. And it's worth asking, is this how justice is supposed to work? The legal zigzag, and where it stands today. The impact of Serial on Adnan's case was undeniable. The Innocence Project took on his case. Legal scholars re-examined the cell phone evidence. In 2016, a judge vacated his conviction and ordered a new trial, largely on the basis of the Asia McLean alibi witness and a cell tower disclaimer. But here's where it gets messy. That ruling was overturned on appeal in 2019. Then in 2022, a new Baltimore State's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, asked for Syed's conviction to be vacated again, citing two new alternative suspects and unreliable cell evidence. Adnan walked out of court a free man. The problem? Hae Min Lee's family wasn't given proper notice of the hearing. Her brother Young Lee watched it over Zoom from the West Coast and told the court, "I feel betrayed." He appealed. In 2023, the conviction was reinstated. In 2024, the Maryland Supreme Court upheld that reinstatement in a 4-3 decision. In 2025, after yet another hearing, a judge resentenced Adnan to time served under Maryland's Juvenile Restoration Act, a law for those convicted as minors who have served over 20 years. So where does that leave us? Adnan Syed is free. His murder conviction remains on the books. He is still legally a convicted murderer of Hae Min Lee. No court has declared him innocent. The current Baltimore State's attorney stated that Syed was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder based on overwhelming direct and circumstantial evidence. He walked out of prison not because a court found he was innocent, but because decades had passed, legal technicalities mounted, and a global media campaign had fundamentally altered the public and political landscape around the case. The uncomfortable conclusion. So let's say the quiet part out loud. If you look at the evidence, not through the lens of Serial's careful storytelling, not through Undisclosed advocacy lens, but through the cold logic of the original trial, a consistent picture emerges. Jay knew where the car was. Jen corroborated his story before she could have known Adnan would be caught. The cell phone placed Adnan's number near the burial site that evening. The Nisha call at 3:32 p.m. placed Adnan and Jay together during the window of the murder. Adnan had motive, he had Hayes' car that day, and he had no coherent alibi. The strongest arguments for Adnan's innocence aren't really arguments for innocence. They're arguments about prosecutorial procedure. The defense didn't do enough. Evidence wasn't properly disclosed. The cell tower's expert testimony was flawed. Those are real concerns. They might even rise to the level of reasonable doubt. But reasonable doubt is a legal standard. It doesn't mean probably didn't do it. Rabia Chaudry believed in her friend. That's understandable. Human even. But what she built, this media architecture of Serial, Undisclosed, the HBO documentary, the book, wasn't journalism in search of truth. It was a campaign in search of freedom. And it worked. True crime has become one of the most consumed genres in the world, and there's genuine value in it. Cases that were buried get sunlight, systemic failures get exposed, innocent people sometimes do get freed. But every time we hit play on the next episode, we should ask ourselves, whose story is this being told from? What am I not being shown? And what about the person who didn't get a podcast deal? Because Hae Min Lee never got to tell her story. She never got a spin-off series. She got a grave in Leakin Park. And somewhere, her family is still watching all of this unfold, not as a podcast, but as real life. Do you think media campaigns like Serial serve justice, Or do they distort it? Let me know below.